The curragh rises on a swell that should not exist. The sea lies flat everywhere else and lifts only here, folding itself slowly into a road. Manannán Mac LIR does not row and does not swim. The water simply agrees to hold him. Lugaid, hands tight on the gunwale, understands he has been seen by something that does not often look back. This is the whole story of Manannán Mac LIR told slowly, from the very beginning. If you drift off before the chariot reaches the shore, that is fine. The sea will keep carrying you either way. The curragh's hide hull creaks, the same low sound it made an hour ago, before any of this began. Some things stay ordinary, even beside a god. The hull creaks again, the same low note, and somewhere beyond the swells, an island that should not be there begins taking a shape no map has ever agreed on. Every story about Manannán asks the same quiet question first. Why would a god who owns the whole sea need one frightened fisherman's boat at all? The mist-cloak is not decoration. Old voyagers said it could hide an entire coastline from anyone. Manannán did not wish to find it, including, sometimes, himself. What was hidden behind that mist tonight? No one on the shore could yet say. Remember that. It matters again before the story ends. This is what we do here. Every night, one old story, something that happened long before the maps were drawn, and somehow still has something to say. Get comfortable now. Let your shoulders settle into whatever is holding you. If you drift off before the island comes into view, the sea god won't mind at all. This is only the beginning of Manannán's story. The part where his household's oldest griefs surface. That's still ahead of us, but not tonight. Tonight, just this. If tonight felt like something worth returning to, subscribe. We'll be here tomorrow night with another old story. Another quiet crossing like this one, now back to ours. Lugaid had fished these waters since boyhood, and had never once seen the swells fold themselves into a road. He gripped the gunwale tighter and said nothing. You have been seen before you thought to look, Manannán said, and his voice carried the particular weight of the tide turning, unhurried and impossible to argue with. The Wave-Chariot drew alongside the curragh without so much as a ripple against the hull, as if the sea itself had agreed to hold its breath. Come aboard if you're willing, Manannán offered, not a command, though few men had ever known how to refuse him. Lugaid found his hands already moving. The island rose fully out of the mist, as the chariot crossed the last stretch of open water, green hills, gray stone, and somewhere behind it all, a low gray mist wall waiting to be crossed. Manannán did not say what waited on the other side of that mist wall, only that Lugaid should hold on, and not look back until told. The chariot moved forward. The mist did not end so much as it opened. Green hills rose out of gray where a moment ago there had been nothing but water, Manannán's own island, showing itself. The island does not sit still on any map. Sailors who have looked for it twice in one lifetime say it was never in the same place, because it does not want to be found unless it chooses to be. Lugaid's feet touched solid ground, and he nearly wept at the ordinary feel of it. Grass, stone, the smell of wood smoke somewhere close. A god's island still smelled like home. Manannán stepped down from the chariot without haste, the mist-cloak settling around him like something breathing out after a long-held breath. He did not look changed by the crossing. Lugaid felt entirely changed by it. You will not be harmed here, Manannán said, not gently, exactly, but plainly, the way a man states which way is north. Lugaid had not thought to ask. Now he wondered if he should have. They walked inland along a path that had not been visible from the shore. Remember that path. Not every guest of Manannán's is shown the same way twice. The hall, when it came into view, was low and long, built more of timber and turf than stone. A house, not a temple. Gods, it seemed, still wanted somewhere to sit down. Inside, the fire burned low and steady, the kind that had clearly been burning a very long time without needing much tending. Someone here was patient. Lugaid did not yet know who. A place had been left empty at the long table nearest the fire, set with a cup no one drank from. Lugaid noticed it before he noticed anything else in the room. Manannán's eyes passed over that empty seat the way a tongue passes over a sore tooth quickly, and on purpose not lingering. He said nothing about it, not yet. You may know that kind of noticing the thing you see in a room that everyone else has trained themselves not to look at. That untouched cup was exactly that kind of thing. A young man entered from a side doorway, dark-haired, sea-gray-eyed, moving like someone still deciding whether solid ground could be trusted. He looked at Lugaid the way one stranger looks at another. "My son," Manannán said, and something in his voice softened for the first time since the wave had risen beneath Lugaid's boat. "Mongán, raised half on land, half here. We are still deciding which half wins." The clasp at Mongán's shoulder was small, bronze, shaped like a fish, easy to miss. Remember it. It was the only mark the sea had ever left on him that he could not take off. "You have probably known someone who belongs to two places at once and is fully at home in neither." That was Mongán, standing in his father's hall, still smelling faintly of ordinary earth. Lugaid asked, carefully, whose seat by the fire stood empty. Mongán's eyes flicked toward his father before he answered. "That is not mine to tell," he said. "Ask him, if he wishes." Manannán did not answer that night. He only stood, said the fire needed no more feeding, and walked out toward the shore alone, his cloak trailing mist behind him like a wake. Some grief in a god moves the same way it moves in anyone else, quietly, toward water, alone, when it thinks no one else is watching it happen. Mongán told Lugaid only this much. Once his father was gone, the seat had belonged to someone who once sat there every night and did not sit there anymore. That was all Mongán would say. Not who, not why. Only that some absences in this house were older than he was, and still not finished happening. Lugaid slept that night in the hall, and dreamed, if it was a dream, of a hall beneath the sea, pale coral walls glowing faintly, and a woman standing very still inside it. In the dream, the woman did not move, and did not speak, and Lugaid understood the way you understand things only in dreams, that she was waiting for someone who was not him. He woke at grey dawn to find Manannán already returned, sitting near the cold hearth, cloak dry, face unreadable. "You dreamed of her," the god said. It was not a question. "Her name is Fand," Manannán said finally. "She waits in a hall beneath the waves. She was not always waiting once. She was simply mine, and I was simply hers." He did not say what had changed between them. He only said that some doors, once opened by grief, do not close simply because you wish they would. Maybe you know that kind of door too. Not locked, not even shut, really. Just still open, long after you thought you had walked all the way through it. Manannán rose and drew his cloak close, mist gathering thick at its edges. "Come," he said, "there is somewhere I have not shown a mortal in longer than you have been alive." They walked past the standing stones, past the last of the ordinary grass, until the ground itself began to feel, not solid exactly, but sure, as though it had agreed to hold them. Ahead, half hidden by soft blue-green light, stood a single silver-barked tree, its blossoms chiming faintly, like small bells struck by no wind at all. "Emhain Ablach," Manannán said. "Time forgets itself here. Some who enter for an hour leave believing only a moment has passed. Others leave believing 100 years have gone by." Lugaid asked which was true for him right now, standing beneath that branch. Manannán only said, "Ask me again when you leave. You will know by then which one it was." They did not linger at the tree. Manannán led him onward, down through light that thickened like water, toward the hall Lugaid had already seen once, in a dream that had not felt like a dream. Fand stood exactly where the dream had placed her, hands loosely clasped, head tilted as though listening for a sound only she could hear. She did not turn when they entered. "You brought a mortal," she said finally, still facing away. Her voice was quiet, not unkind. "You never used to do that. Something in you must be lonelier than you say." Manannán did not deny it. He only said her name once softly, the way you might touch a bruise to see if it still hurt. It still hurt. Her shoulders told him so. Lugaid understood, without being told outright, that he was standing inside something far older than one fisherman's ordinary night on the water. He stayed quiet. That felt like the only right thing to do. "Why does she wait here alone?" Lugaid asked later, once they had climbed back up through the thick blue light. Manannán's answer was slow in coming and did not fully arrive. "There was someone before me," Manannán said at last. "Or perhaps after. I have never been entirely certain which. That is the part of the story I like least to tell. Remember that unfinished sentence? There is a mortal name folded inside it, one that will not be spoken aloud in this hall for a long while yet." They returned to the hall by the ordinary road this time, past the standing stones, the grass wet with evening mist. Mongán waited for them at the door, arms crossed, worried in a way he tried to hide. "You took him to see her," Mongán said. Not a question, not quite an accusation either. His father only nodded once. Some silences answer more than words could manage. Old voyagers who sailed these waters long before this hall was ever timbered spoke of a mist that behaved like something alive, one that could thicken on command, or thin at a whim not its own. They called it the Feth Fiada, the mist of concealment. Boats vanished inside it and returned later with sailors swearing the crossing had taken no time at all, or far too much. A fisherman did not need to believe in gods to respect that mist. He only needed to have lost a friend to it once and never fully trusted a clear morning again. This is not superstition dressed up as old wisdom. This is what people who worked the sea for a living actually believed plainly, the way you believe in weather, because it had cost them something to learn it. So when Manannán wore that cloak, and the mist moved as though it knew his name, it was not decoration. It was the oldest fear sailors carried, worn easily, like a second skin. Inside the hall that night, Manannán finally told Lugaid why a fisherman had been brought here at all. Not by accident, and not out of simple kindness. "There is an oath sailors used to swear by my name," Manannán said. "I want to know if it is still spoken, if it still means anything to the ones who say it." Lugaid admitted that he had sworn it once himself, half out of habit, half out of fear, the night his own father drowned within sight of this same coast. Manannán went very still at that. "Which shore?" he asked. Lugaid named it, the shore where 3 great waves are said to rise before disaster ever comes. "I did not raise that wave," Manannán said quietly. "I have never claimed every drowning as my own doing, but I remember the ones I could not stop. Your father's may be among them." This was not comfort, exactly, but it was honesty. And Lugaid had not expected a god to offer him that instead of easy reassurance. He found he preferred it. You may know that kind of honesty too, the kind that does not fix anything, but somehow still helps more than a kind lie would have. Manannán rose before dawn each day that followed, walking the shoreline alone before Lugaid woke. This became the rhythm of the house, the creak of the door, then silence, then his slow return. Mongán began joining Lugaid at the table each morning, curious about the ordinary human world in a way that felt almost hungry, questions about markets, about weather, about how bread was baked. "I was fostered partly among mortals as a boy," Mongán admitted. "There is a promise tied to that, one my father has not yet asked me to keep. I think about it more than I say." Lugaid did not press him on what the promise was. Some threads are handed to us early and only make sense when the story finally pulls them tight, much later on. One morning Manannán returned from his shoreline walk carrying something new, a single gray-white shell, small and unbroken, held carefully in one closed hand. He did not explain the shell. He simply set it on the table near the empty seat, beside the untouched cup, and said nothing more about it that whole day. "Remember that shell too?" Small things placed quietly on empty tables tend to matter more than the loud things said out loud in this kind of story. Days pass the way they do in a place where time is not entirely trustworthy. Lugaid could not say if it had been 5 days or 15. The mist outside made no distinction. A messenger arrived by no visible road, simply standing at the hall door one gray afternoon, as though he had always been there, waiting to be noticed. He carried word from the Tuatha de Danann's great feast hall, Manannán's enchanted swine, the ones that returned to life after every meal, had gone missing from their pen. This was no small matter. Those swine fed the whole gathered clan, night after night, precisely because they never truly died. Their disappearance meant someone doubted whether that magic still held. Manannán sighed the way any host sighs when a guest causes trouble in another house entirely. "They will need me there," he said. "This will not settle itself." He turned to Mongán before he turned to anyone else. "Watch the hall while I am gone," he said, "and watch him." He nodded once toward Lugaid. Mongán straightened, taking the weight of it seriously. This is the part the old tellings rarely dwell on, that even a sea god's household runs on ordinary responsibility, passed hand to hand, the same as any other family's does. Manannán's Wave-Chariot was ready at the shoreline by the time he reached it, the pale horse already restless. mane moving faintly though no wind stirred the grass around it. He looked back once, not at Lugaid, and not quite at Mongán either. His eyes went to the empty seat by the fire, visible through the open door, before he finally climbed aboard. The chariot rose onto the water's surface and was gone within moments, spray hardening briefly into a glowing road before dissolving back into ordinary sea. The hall felt different with him gone, smaller somehow, though nothing in it had actually shrunk. Lugaid had not realized how much space one presence could quietly fill. You may have felt that too. Once a room that does not change in any visible way, and yet feels entirely different the moment one particular person leaves it. Mongán took his father's words seriously. He walked the shoreline himself that first night, checking the mist border the way a son checks a door his father asked him to lock. Something in the mist felt thinner than usual that night. Not broken, not torn, just thinner, the way ice feels thinner in one spot than everywhere else around it. Mongán said nothing of it to Lugaid that night. He only resolved to check again in the morning, and did not entirely succeed in falling asleep afterward. Here's the part the old tellings never make obvious. A thin place in the mist is not always a danger. Sometimes it is simply a door that has not decided yet which way it opens. By morning the thin place had closed again on its own, and Mongán almost convinced himself he had imagined it. Almost. He kept the memory anyway, folded away for later. Days without their father in the hall pulled Mongán and Lugaid closer together. The way shared watch duty pulls strangers into something like friendship, almost without either one noticing it happen. "There is a promise," Mongán finally said one evening, unprompted. "My father fostered me partly among mortal kin. I owe a debt to that house, a message someday, that I have not yet carried." He did not say what the message was, or why it had not yet been carried. Some vows, it seems, wait patiently for the exact right night to finally be spoken. This moment is easy to miss, tucked quietly between other nights. But it matters before the end. Remember that Mongán's debt was spoken aloud once, long before it was ever paid. On the seventh evening, or what felt like the seventh, a low sound reached the hall from the shoreline, distant and rhythmic, like something enormous breathing slowly out at sea. Mongán went to the shore alone this time, telling Lugaid to stay by the fire. Something about his voice made Lugaid listen without arguing, for once. At the water's edge, the mist had thinned again worse than before, a gap wide enough now that Mongán could see straight through it, into shapes moving on the far side. He had never crossed the border alone before. His father had always been beside him, or the crossing had happened in the safety of the Wave-Chariot. Tonight there was no chariot, only his own 2 feet. He stepped forward anyway, not because he was certain, because his father had asked him to watch the hall, and watching sometimes means walking straight toward the thing that frightens you. The crossing pulled at him strangely, thinner than he remembered, colder, as though the border itself had not fully decided whether to let a half-mortal son pass through unharmed. He nearly turned back twice. What kept him moving forward was small and stubborn, the memory of his father's hand briefly on his shoulder, days before, saying watch the hall. He came through on the far side gasping, soaked to the skin, standing on ground that felt subtly wrong beneath his feet, not the ordinary shore, and not quite the other world either. He would learn, much later, that he had crossed into a border place, not fully one world or the other. Remember that place. It would matter again before this story finished. The shapes he had seen through the mist resolved into ordinary things after all, driftwood, standing stones, a lone heron watching him with mild disinterest. Nothing dangerous, only strange. He found the crossing back easier than he expected, the mist thinning obligingly to let him through, as though it had only wanted to test whether he would come at all. Lugaid found him at dawn, sitting on the wet sand, staring at nothing in particular, water still dripping from his hair. "I crossed alone," Mongán said simply. "I did not know I could." Something in Mongán had shifted, quietly, the way a tide shifts without announcing itself. No sudden change, only a slow new certainty settling into where uncertainty had been before. This is the part most retellings skip entirely, that before Manannán's son ever carried a message between worlds, he first had to learn he could survive crossing alone. Word reached them soon after that Manannán's business at the feast hall was nearly settled, the missing swine found, the dispute untangled, though not without cost to someone's pride. But another message arrived close behind the first one, quieter, more urgent, carried not by any messenger but by the mist itself, curling low and insistent around the hall's threshold. Something was moving toward Fan's sea hall that had not been invited. Mongán felt it before he understood it, the way you feel a storm coming before the first cloud appears. He did not yet have the power to stop whatever this was, but he knew who did, and knew too that his father was still too far away to reach in time on his own. What Mongán did next is a thread this story will pick back up later. For now, only this: he chose not to wait quietly by the fire. Lugaid, still ashore, felt the shift in the hall's mood without needing anyone to explain it to him. Something had begun that would not simply resolve itself by morning. We will follow where this leads, but not tonight, not all the way, for now. Let the mist settle again, and let the hall's fire burn low and even, the way it always does before morning. Manannán returned 2 mornings later, cloak dry, expression unreadable, and found his hall changed in small ways he could not immediately name. Mongán stood taller. Lugaid looked more at home. Mongán told him everything: the thinning mist, the solitary crossing, the shape moving toward the sea hall that had not yet resolved itself. Manannán listened without interrupting once. When Mongán finished, his father said only, "You did well," then quieter. "You did what I would have done. That frightens me more than it should." You may have felt that too. The strange ache of being told you did exactly the right thing by someone who wishes you had never needed to do it at all. That evening, Manannán readied the Wave-Chariot again, this time without waiting for a messenger's word. Something was moving toward Fan's hall, and he did not intend to arrive too late to matter. "Stay here," he told both Mongán and Lugaid. Mongán's jaw tightened, but he did not argue this time. Some watches, it seems, are meant to be kept quietly, from a distance. The chariot rose onto the water and was gone in moments, the pale wheel track glowing briefly across the dark waves before fading, exactly the way it always did. What waited for him at Fan's hall is a thread this story will follow soon. For now, we stay behind on the shore, in the quiet, with those left to wait. Waiting, it turns out, is its own kind of work, the not knowing settling into your chest like a stone you cannot quite put down, no matter how you shift your weight. Mongán did not sit still for long. He walked the shoreline again, checking the mist border out of habit now more than duty, listening for that low breathing sound from before. The mist held steady this time. No thin places, no strange gaps. Whatever had been pressing against the border seemed, for now, to have turned its attention elsewhere. Here's the part the old tellings never make obvious. Sometimes the danger does not arrive where you are watching, it arrives exactly where the watcher is not. Dawn came without word from the sea hall. Lugaid had not slept, and Mongán had not either, though both pretended otherwise when they finally sat down together near the fire. "He will come back," Mongán said, more to convince himself than Lugaid. "He always comes back." He did not sound entirely certain, and Lugaid chose not to point that out. You may know that particular kind of waiting too, repeating a comfort to yourself until it either becomes true, or you simply grow tired enough to stop needing it to be. By midday, a faint shimmer appeared far out on the water, the Wave-Chariot's pale road forming slowly across the waves, exactly where the horizon met the gray sky. Manannán returned alone, cloak torn slightly at one edge, expression harder than either of them had ever seen it. He said only, "It is settled for now." For now, that phrase sat heavy in the hall's quiet. Neither Mongán nor Lugaid asked what it meant. They had both learned by now that some answers arrive only when they are ready. This is the part that matters before the end. A rival had come close to Fan's hall and had been driven off. But the victory had cost Manannán more than the torn cloak showed. We will follow that thread properly soon. The rival, the sea hall, the cost of that victory. For now, let the fire burn low, and let the household simply rest. Days settled again after that, quieter than before, though something in the hall had shifted permanently. The empty seat by the fire felt somehow a little less empty than it had. Manannán began speaking of Fan more openly now, small details offered without being asked, the sound of her laugh once, long ago, before the silence had settled over her. She was not always still like that, he said. She used to move through that hall the way the tide moves, never quite stopping, always somewhere new to be. Lugaid asked carefully what had made her stop. Manannán's answer came slower this time, but it came, "A mortal man," he said, "one she loved before I understood what that would cost her." He did not yet say the mortal's name. Remember that too. Some names in this story arrive only when the teller is finally ready to let them land with their full weight. Instead, he changed the subject the way people do when a memory has gone somewhere too tender to keep holding, asking Lugaid, gently, about his own life on the ordinary shore. Lugaid told him of his boat, his small stretch of coastline, the wife who waited for him with a lamp in the window on nights the sea ran rough. Manannán listened the way a man listens to something he has not had in a long while. An ordinary evening, an ordinary story, nothing at stake in the telling of it. "I should send you home soon," Manannán said eventually, almost reluctantly. "Your wife's lamp has burned a long while without you. Time moves strangely here. You may have already been missed." Lugaid admitted he had lost count of the days entirely, 5 or 15 or 50. The mist here made no promises about how much of his life had passed without him. Mongán offered to walk him partway to the shore himself, and Lugaid accepted, grateful for one more quiet hour among people who had, somehow, become something like family. At the water's edge, the Wave-Chariot waited, the pale horse calmer now than Lugaid had ever seen it, as though it too understood this particular crossing was gentler than the last. "You will remember all of this," Manannán said, before Lugaid climbed aboard. "Most mortals forget. I am choosing this time to let you keep it." Lugaid did not fully understand what that cost the god to offer. Remember that offer too. Choosing what a person is allowed to remember, and what they are spared from remembering, will turn out to matter more than anyone standing on that shore yet understood. The chariot carried Lugaid back across the wave road, spray hardening briefly beneath the wheels, mist parting ahead of them the whole way, obedient the way it always seemed to be around him. Lugaid's own coastline rose out of the mist eventually. Familiar rocks, familiar sky, a small lamp still faintly glowing in a cottage window despite the hour. "One night," Manannán said as the chariot slowed near the shallows, "that is all that has passed here, though it will not feel that way to you." He was right. It did not. Lugaid stepped down onto his own beach at last, the chariot already dissolving into ordinary surf behind him, and stood there a long moment simply breathing the familiar salt air. You may know that particular relief too, the moment ordinary ground finally feels ordinary again, after something too large to fully hold has been carried a long way home. He did not tell his wife everything, not that first morning, but he kept the small gray-white shell Manannán had pressed into his palm before parting, and he never once forgot the empty seat by that fire. Back on the island, the hall settled into its familiar rhythm. Manannán at the shoreline before dawn, Mongán restless with a debt not yet paid, Fan still waiting, still unmoved beneath the sea. But something had shifted, even if no one in the hall could yet name exactly what. Arrival had come close once already. The mist had thinned more than once. These things, it turns out, rarely happen only a single time. Mongán's fostering debt sat with him more heavily now, unspoken but present, the way a stone in a shoe makes itself known with every single step, whether or not you mention it aloud. This is the part the old tellings rarely dwell on, that a god's household carries the same unfinished business as any other. Debts owed, griefs unspoken. Doors left open a little too long. Manannán stood at the shoreline one evening longer than usual, watching the mist border with an intensity Mongán had rarely seen in him. Something out there had not finished with this house yet. "There is a rival still circling," Manannán admitted quietly when Mongán finally asked. "He was driven off once. He has not given up. Some suitors, mortal or otherwise, rarely do." Mongán asked if his father would fight again, if it came to that. Manannán's answer was slow and heavier than any answer he had given yet. "If she wishes it of me, only if she wishes it." That answer stayed with Mongán longer than he expected. A god who would not simply act, but who waited for permission from someone he loved. That felt like something worth remembering. We will follow this rival's story soon, and Fan's old grief along with it. The mortal hero, whose name has still not once been spoken aloud in this hall. Not yet. For tonight, let the hall rest. The fire low, the mist steady at its border, the household holding its unfinished threads a little longer, the way any house holds what it has not yet had to face. Word came to the Isle of Man before the tide had fully turned, a summons from the feast hall of the Tuatha De Danann. Manannán's swine were needed again, so it seemed was he. The enchanted swine, the ones that returned whole to their pen each dawn no matter how thoroughly the hall had eaten the night before, belonged to him. Their absence at any feast was always noticed first. A dispute had broken out among the Tuatha De Danann, who had first right to butcher a share, whose portion had been shorted at the last gathering. Small quarrels, in gods as in men, rarely stay small. Manannán was needed to settle it, not as a warrior, but as the one whose gift the swine had been in the first place. Only he could say with any weight how the portions ought to fall. Before he left, he found Fand in the sea hall and told her plainly. He would be gone some days, the mist border would hold. Mongán would watch the shore in his place. Fand nodded, said little, as was her way. But something crossed her face before she turned back to the still pool at the hall's center, something that looked almost like the shape of an old fear. Remember that look. We will come back to it, not tonight, but soon enough. For now, the Wave-Chariot was waiting, and a god's obligations, like a fisherman's, do not wait long for anyone. Mongán watched his father's chariot dissolve into spray in distance, then turned to the shoreline duty left to him. Watch the mist border, his father had said. Nothing more, nothing less. The first day passed without incident. Gulls circled the mist wall as they always did. The tide came and went. Mongán almost let himself believe the watching would be easy. On the second evening, the mist thinned in one place, only slightly, only for a moment, the way ice thins before it cracks. Mongán noticed. He did not yet know what he was noticing. Through the thin place, briefly, something dark moved, low along the water, the shape of a boat, or perhaps something wearing a boat's shape. Then the mist closed again, and it was gone. Mongán did not know yet whether to be afraid. He had been raised half in his father's world and half in his mother's, and in neither had anyone taught him what to do when the border itself grew thin. He thought of crossing the mist border himself to look closer. He thought better of it. His father's one instruction had been to watch, not to cross. He would hold to that, whatever it cost him. That night, in the sea hall, Fand felt it too, a change in the water's pressure against the coral walls, faint but unmistakable, like a held breath somewhere far off finally being released. She did not call for Mongán. She did not send word across the mist to Manannán at the feast hall. She simply waited, the way she had waited for so many things before this one. Here's the part. The old tellings rarely make obvious. Waiting, in this house, was never truly empty. It was its own kind of watch, its own kind of work, whether or not anyone named it so. Meanwhile, at the feast hall, the dispute over the swine dragged longer than expected. Old grievances, once spoken aloud, tend to summon other old grievances that had been waiting their own turn. Manannán settled it in the end, not by decree, but by reminder. The swine returned each dawn precisely because no one owned them fully. That, he said, was the entire point of the gift. The hall quieted. The matter for now was closed, but Manannán lingered a moment longer than he needed to, some unnamed unease pulling at him the way tide pulls at a boat not fully moored. He left before the feast's second course was served, which no one at that table had ever seen him do before. Something was pulling him back toward the water. He did not yet know what. The Wave-Chariot carried him faster than usual that night, the pale horse's mane breaking into full white spray, as though the sea itself understood his hurry before he had spoken it aloud. On the shore, Mongán had not slept. He kept his post at the mist border through the second night, watching the thin place that had not fully closed again, no matter how still the water seemed. This moment is easy to miss, half asleep as you might be by now. But stay with it. It matters before the story is through. Some thresholds, once thinned, do not close again on their own. Near dawn, the dark shape returned, closer this time, close enough that Mongán could see it was, in fact, a boat. A single figure stood at its prow, cloaked, unmoving, watching the shore. Mongán called out, once, the way his father had taught him to challenge any stranger at the border. The figure did not answer. It only watched, and the mist around the boat thickened further. Then, as quickly as it had come, the boat withdrew, not fleeing exactly, but retreating the way a wave retreats, certain of its own return. Mongán stood alone again on the empty shore. It was at that exact moment that the Wave-Chariot broke through the horizon, Manannán arriving at last, his face already set with the particular grimness of a father who has felt trouble before seeing it. Mongán told him everything: the thinning mist, the dark boat, the cloaked figure who would not answer a challenge. His father listened without interrupting, which somehow made it worse. "The rival," Manannán said finally, quiet and certain. "He has grown bolder while I was away." He did not say the rival's name. Some names in this house were still being avoided. Manannán went straight to Fand. He found her exactly where he expected, by the still pool, calm on the surface, though he had learned by now not to trust that calm entirely. "He came again," Manannán said, and it was not a question. Fand's hand stilled in her lap. "He always does," she answered. "That has never once been the difficulty." "Then what is the difficulty?" Manannán asked gently. The way you might ask a question you already have feared the answer to. Fand was quiet a long moment before she spoke again. "The difficulty," she said at last, "is that some part of me still listens for a name I have not let myself say in this hall, and he knows it. That is why he keeps returning. We will not press her further tonight for that name. It belongs to a different part of this story, one we are not yet ready for. For now, only know that it is old, and it is not the rival's." Manannán did not press either. He simply sat beside her a while, saying nothing, which in that house had become its own quiet language, spoken more often than either of them admitted aloud. Outside, the mist border held through that day and the next, but Mongán kept his watch anyway, sleeping in short stretches, waking at every shift in the wind off the water. On the third night, Manannán himself took the watch, sending Mongán inland to rest properly. A father's small mercy, offered without much comment, the way most mercies in that house were given. The dark boat did not come that night, nor the next. Whoever guided it seemed to sense that the god of the sea himself now stood watch, and even bold suitors think twice before such a welcome. A week passed this way, quiet on the surface, the household easing back into its old rhythms, the tide, the fire, the small daily tasks that make a house feel like a house rather than a watchpost. But calm, in a story like this one, is rarely the ending, only the space between one wave and the next, and Manannán, more than anyone, understood exactly what waves were capable of. It was Lugaid, the old fisherman king, who brought the first real warning, arriving by Curragh at the Isle of Man's shore, weathered and out of breath, asking urgently for Manannán by name. Lugaid had seen the 3 warning waves rise off his own coast, Tuath, Rudrake, and Cleodna, each in turn, exactly as the old sailors' stories always said they would before disaster. Manannán's expression changed the moment he heard it. 3 waves rising together meant something greater than one bold suitor testing a mist border. It meant the sea itself was choosing sides. "Not one suitor, then," Manannán said quietly, almost to himself. "Something larger has taken an interest in this house. We should have expected it would not stay small for long." He thanked Lugaid for the warning, as he always did, with more genuine gratitude than most gods bother to show a mortal fisherman. Old debts, it seemed, were remembered carefully in this household. Lugaid left before nightfall, back across the water toward his own coast, carrying with him no answers, only the quiet satisfaction of having done what a good sailor always does, warned in time. Manannán called Mongán and Fand together that evening, the first true gathering of the household since the trouble began. Something needed to be said plainly, before it grew any larger unspoken. "There's a rival," Manannán told them both, "and now, it seems, something larger standing behind him. I do not yet know what, but I mean to find out before it reaches this shore uninvited." Fand offered, quietly, to go to the mist border herself, and meet whoever came directly, to end the uncertainty rather than let it circle the household any longer. Manannán did not answer at once. He would remember, later, that this was the exact moment he almost said no to her, almost decided her will mattered less than his own fear for her. He is glad still that he did not. "Not alone," was what he said instead. "But yes, you may meet him. I will not stand between you and your own choosing. Not in this house, not ever." Fand's shoulders eased, just slightly. "Here is a small thing worth holding on to, that a sea god's true power in this house was never really the Wave-Chariot or the mist-cloak. It was simply the discipline of stepping back when asked." Mongán, watching this exchange, understood something new about his father that night. that strength and restraint were not opposites in this family. They were, more often than not, the very same thing. 3 days later, Fand walked to the mist border alone, as agreed, with only Manannán watching from a careful distance and Mongán further back still, ready but not yet needed. The dark boat appeared as it had before, gliding out from the thickest part of the mist, its cloaked rider standing at the prow, unmoving, waiting for Fand to close the last of the distance. "You have circled this shore for weeks," Fand called out, her voice steadier than she expected it to be. "Enough circling. Say plainly what it is you want from this house." The figure lowered its hood at last. Not a monster, not a rival warrior, an otherworldly lord named Ohide, one of the lesser kings of the sea folk, his face more sorrowful than fearsome. Eochaid claimed no violence in his intentions, only an old stubborn hope that Fand might one day choose his hall over Manannán's. He had watched, he said, for longer than she knew. "You mistake my silence for uncertainty," Fand told him, gently but without any hesitation. "I have chosen already, and long ago my grief belongs to someone else entirely, not to you." That word grief, not love, hung strangely in the air. Manannán, watching from a distance, heard it too, and filed it away carefully, the way you keep something you are not ready to open yet. Eochaid did not press further that day. He drew his hood back up, turned his boat, and withdrew into the mist without another word. Not defeated exactly, but not finished either. Some hopes are patient. Fand walked back from the shore with her chin higher than it had been in weeks. Whatever the encounter had cost her, it had also given something back, the simple relief of having spoken at last. Manannán met her halfway across the shore, and for once did not ask what had been said. He only offered his arm, and she took it, and that, this time, was answer enough for them both. But the word grief did not leave Manannán's thoughts, not that night nor the nights after. He began, quietly, to wonder whose grief it truly was, and how long she had been carrying it alone. He did not ask her outright. Some doors, he had learned, open only when the person on the other side is ready, not a moment sooner, no matter how much you might wish to hurry them. The household settled into an uneasy peace after that, Eochaid's visits growing rarer, though never quite stopping altogether, a low tide that never fully went out, only pulled back for a while. Mongán, meanwhile, had begun asking his father small questions about the salmon pool inland, the one said to hold the gathered knowledge of the sea itself within one very old fish. "Not yet," Manannán told him, not unkindly, "that knowledge finds its own moment to be useful. You are not quite ready to carry it, not yet." Mongán accepted this, though it cost him something too. We will return to that pool later in this story, and to what Mongán is finally allowed to carry from it. For now, remember only that it waits inland, patient, ringed by hazel and shadow. Weeks passed in this uneasy but livable rhythm. Small warnings, small mercies, a household learning to hold its unfinished business without letting it break anything further. It held. Mostly it held. Then one gray morning, Mongán came running from the shoreline faster than his father had ever seen him move. Faster, even, than the day the dark boat first appeared at the mist border. Eochaid had returned, Mongán said, breathless, but not alone this time, and not asking politely from a distance. A small fleet of pale boats had gathered just beyond the mist border, waiting. Manannán's calm broke, just slightly, for the first time in this whole telling. He reached for his cloak before he had even finished rising from his seat by the fire. This is the moment worth staying awake a little longer for, if you can. Not the end of the story, only its first true test. What comes next will not undo easily, whichever way it falls. Manannán reached the shore at a speed that startled even Mongán, cloak billowing wide behind him, mist pouring from its edges faster than either of them had ever seen it move before. Fand was already there, standing steady at the tide line, refusing to retreat toward the hall despite Mongán's urging. Whatever this was, she said, she would not hide from it inside stone walls. Eochaid's fleet pressed against the mist border from the far side, the wall of fog straining visibly now, thinning in patches all along its length rather than in one place alone. This is no longer a suitor's patience, Manannán called across the water, voice carrying farther than any mortal voice could. This is a small war you are bringing to my shore, Eochaid. Eochaid's answer, when it came, was not defiant but desperate, a small, otherworldly king who had convinced himself, wrongly, that force might succeed where patience and honesty had already failed him. Manannán drew Fragarax then, the answerer, its blade still half lost in its own shimmer even in his hand, not to strike first but to make plain that a line here would in fact be held. The mist border, sensing its master's will, thickened suddenly and violently along its whole length, throwing Oichaid's small fleet back several boat lengths in a single surge of gray-white fog. One boat, Eochaid's own, was thrown clear of the fleet entirely, spinning toward the rocks near the shore of the three waves, the very waves Lugaid had watched rise weeks before. And here's the part that surprised everyone watching. Mongán most of all, Manannán did not let Oichaid drown. He crossed the water in an instant and caught the boat himself. "I will defend this shore," Manannán told the shaking Ohaid, low and final, "but I will not let the sea take a fool for a mistake made out of loneliness. Go home, do not return." This is the part the old tellings often skip past quickly, moving straight to the victory, but it is worth pausing here. Why sailors of Ireland and Man once swore their safest oaths by Manannán's name. It was not only his power over water that sailors trusted. It was moments exactly like this one, a god capable of ending a threat entirely, choosing instead to spare a frightened, foolish rival. Merchants crossing the Irish Sea once left small offerings on the water before a voyage, not out of fear, but out of something closer to trust, the way you might trust an old, fair-handed neighbor. Even the fiercest tellings of Manannán agree on this one detail. He was rarely cruel, even to those who wronged him. Restraint, more than any wave or storm, was the shape of his real strength. That old trust. Sailors' trust is part of why his name outlived so many others from that same age. We will return to what remains of it much later, near the end of this telling. Eochaid rode home that night in silence, his small fleet trailing behind him, chastened rather than defeated. The mist border closed fully behind them and did not thin again for a long while after. Back on the shore, Fand had not moved from her place at the tide line through the whole confrontation. When Manannán returned, soaked and quiet, she simply reached out and took his hand. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Mongán, watching from a little distance, understood that some things, once faced together, need no further words to settle themselves properly. That night the household ate together quietly. The fire built higher than usual, no one quite ready to speak of what had happened, but all of them glad, plainly, to still be sitting there at all. This victory, though real, had not resolved everything. The word Fand had spoken at the border. Grief and not love still sat unaddressed between them, patient, waiting its own turn to be opened. We will come to that word properly before this telling ends. For now, let the household rest in its hard-won calm, a calm that was, this time, genuinely earned rather than merely borrowed. Days folded quietly into weeks after that. Mongán grew taller, steadier, more willing to stand his own watch without needing his father nearby. Some debts, it turns out, are repaid slowly, in exactly this way. Fand, too, seemed lighter in small ways, humming faintly sometimes while she worked, a sound Mongán had never once heard from her before that spring. Small changes, real ones, all the same. Manannán, for his part, was called away twice more that season for smaller matters, a dispute over tides near a mortal harbor, a favor owed to an old ally among the Tuatha de Danann. Each time, he returned a little faster than he needed to, unwilling still to leave the household unwatched for very long. Old caution, once earned, does not simply undo itself in a single season. One evening, returning from such an errand, Manannán found Mongán at the salmon pool inland, sitting quietly at its edge, watching the pale shape move slowly beneath the water's dark surface. Not asking this time, Mongán said, before his father could speak, only watching. You said the knowledge would find its own moment. I thought perhaps it likes to be watched for first. Manannán said nothing for a moment, something like pride crossing his weathered face. Then he sat beside his son at the water's edge, and for once simply watched along with him. We are closer now than you might think to the part of this story where that pool finally matters. Not tonight, but soon. Hold that image a little longer, if sleep allows you to. Autumn came to the Isle of Man the way it always did. Not with sudden change, but with a slow deepening of the mist, the light growing softer and more golden across the hills. Lugaid visited again that season, this time without urgency, simply to share a meal and trade news of the mortal coast. Old friendships, once tested by danger, tend to settle more comfortably afterward. He told them of a strange thing seen near the northern coast, a hero of the mortal world, famous even among gods, seen standing alone at the edge of the water for hours, saying nothing. Fan's hands went still over her bowl at the mention of it. Manannán noticed, though he said nothing at the table. Some names, spoken even by accident, carry their own particular weight. Lugaid, unaware of the weight he had carried into the room, moved on to lighter news soon after. The moment passed on the surface, the way most difficult moments learn to pass at a full table. That night, though, Fan walked alone to the still pool in her hall, and stood there a long while, saying a single name quietly to the water, a name we still will not write down just yet. Manannán, standing quietly in the doorway, heard only the shape of the sound, not the word itself. He did not enter. He simply stood watch a while, the way he had learned to, and then withdrew. This is the part the story asks you to simply carry forward without resolving, a grief with a name attached to it, and a household that loves her enough to let her hold it in her own time. Winter arrived slowly on the island, the mist turning colder without ever quite becoming frost, the sea darker but no less familiar to the household that had made its peace with living beside it. Mongán turned older that winter, in the way that matters more than counted years, steadier in his watch, quicker to notice small changes in the tide before anyone else in the household did. It was Mongán, in fact, who first noticed the change in the salmon pool, the water running clearer than it ever had, the pale shape beneath it somehow closer to the surface than before. He ran to tell his father, and this time Manannán's answer was different. Then perhaps, he said slowly, "The moment you asked about has finally arrived. Go to the water and see what it offers you." We will follow Mongán back to that pool soon, and see exactly what the old salmon's knowledge asks of him in return. For now, only know that the water has begun, at last, to answer. Manannán watched his son walk inland toward the pool, cloak drawn close against the cold, and felt something he rarely allowed himself to name outright, a quiet, uncomplicated pride in who his son was becoming. Fan joined him at the shoreline as he watched, slipping her hand into his without a word. Together they stood a long while, watching the mist swallow their son's shape as he walked further inland. At the pool, Mongán knelt at the water's edge exactly as he had before. But this time the pale salmon rose fully to the surface, its ancient eye fixed steadily upon him, unblinking and patient. No words passed between them, not in any language Mongán could later explain, but something settled into him at the water's edge that day, quiet, certain, and entirely his own to carry from then on. He walked home slower than he had walked out, not from fatigue, but from the simple need to hold what had just happened a little longer before speaking it aloud to anyone else in the house. Here's the part worth holding gently before sleep, if nothing else tonight, that some gifts do not announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly and ask only to be recognized once they've settled. What Mongán carried home that day, he would not fully understand the shape of for some time yet, but it would matter greatly before this story reaches its end. Remember the pool. Remember the salmon's eye. Winter deepened further. The mist border held firm, undisturbed by any further visits from Wave-Chariot or anyone like him. For once the household simply lived, without watching the water quite so carefully. Fan's humming returned more often that season, familiar now rather than surprising. Manannán found himself listening for it the way sailors listen for the particular sound of their own home shore. But peace in this story, as in most old stories, is rarely permanent. Only a pause long enough to let everyone gather their strength before whatever comes to test them again. Near the season's end, a strange stillness fell over the mist border, not the calm of safety, but the particular stillness that comes just before weather changes, the kind old sailors learn never to fully trust. Manannán said nothing to alarm the household, but he began, quietly, sharpening the edge of Fraggarok that evening, a small habit he only ever returned to when something in the water had caught his attention. Mongán noticed, as he now noticed most things about his father's small habits. He did not ask, he simply began, without being told, to keep his own closer watch on the water once more. This is worth remembering as we move toward the heart of the story, still some distance ahead, that this household had learned by now to read trouble long before trouble ever announced itself plainly. Days passed without incident, though the stillness at the border never fully lifted. Fand, sensing the household's quiet tension, asked Manannán directly one evening what exactly he was watching for. "I do not know yet," Manannán admitted honestly. "Only that the water feels the way it did before the 3 waves rose last season. I would rather be wrong and ready than right and unprepared." Fand nodded, unafraid, and simply asked what she could do to help keep the watch. It was, Manannán realized then, exactly the kind of question that made this household worth defending at all. The 3 of them, father, mother, son, began keeping the watch together after that, in shifts, the household's old rhythm bending slightly to hold this new shared vigilance without breaking under it. On the 9th night of the shared watch, it was Fand's turn at the shore when the water finally moved. Not a boat this time, but the sea itself, rising unnaturally high along the tide line. She called for the others at once, her voice carrying clear and steady across the dark, no trace of the old fear in it. Only the sharp practical urgency of someone doing exactly her part. Manannán and Mongán reached the shore within moments, and together the 3 of them watched the water rise further still, the mist border itself now trembling visibly along its entire length. This was not Eochaid returning, Manannán realized quickly. This was something older, something that had been circling far longer than one lonely otherworldly king ever could have managed on his own. We will not name what rose from the water that night just yet, only that it was vast and old and had been drawn somehow by the very same unhealed grief the household had been carrying quietly all along. Manannán stepped forward alone to meet it, cloak thrown back fully, the feth fiata pouring from its edges in a wide, unbroken sheet, thick enough now to hide the entire shoreline from anything beyond it. Beneath the surface, the water pulled back suddenly, drawing away from the shore in a long, unnatural retreat, the kind of retreat, Lugaid would later say, that always comes just before a very large wave. Fand grabbed Mongán's arm and pulled him back toward higher ground without hesitation, some old instinct in her moving faster than thought. Whatever this was, it was not a thing to watch from the tide line. The wave came a moment later, not from the sea itself, but from within the retreat, rising impossibly tall out of the exposed sand, dark and towering against the night sky. Manannán raised both arms, and Froggerach's shimmer flared bright enough to be seen even through the thick mist he had already spread, a single point of clear light against an otherwise vast darkness. The wave broke against that light rather than the shore, crashing down in a wide arc of white foam that fell short of the household entirely, spending its enormous force against Manannán alone. When the water settled, Manannán stood exactly where he had before, soaked through but upright, breathing hard, the shore behind him entirely untouched. Whatever had risen had been turned back, for now. Fand and Mongán ran to him at once, and for a long moment none of them spoke, simply standing together in the aftermath, grateful for the ordinary sound of the tide returning to its normal rhythm. "It will come again," Manannán said finally, quiet and certain, once he had caught his breath. "Whatever that was, it was only testing us tonight. The true visit is still ahead of us. This is the victory the old tellings usually pause on, a threat repelled, a household still standing, but listen closely tonight, because Manannán himself did not consider this the story's ending, only its true beginning. For tonight, though, let this be enough. A family standing together on a quiet shore, a threat turned back, a mist border holding steady once more beneath a sky slowly filling with stars." They walked back to the hall together in the quiet after, no one hurrying, the night around them settling back into its ordinary softness, as if the sea itself had agreed, for now, to rest. Inside, the fire was built up higher than usual, and no one spoke for a long while of what exactly had risen from the water. Some things need warmth and quiet before they can be named at all. It was Fand, finally, who broke the silence, her voice low but steady. "I think I know what that was," she said, "or at least I think I know why it came looking for us." Manannán turned to her fully patient, the way he always was when she finally chose to speak. Mongán, too, sat very still, sensing that something long withheld was finally about to surface. "There was someone," Fand began slowly, "before this house, before either of you, a mortal hero. I loved him once in a way I never fully let myself finish grieving properly. We will not press further into that memory tonight. It belongs properly to what comes next in this telling. For now, only know his name has not yet been spoken, though it is close now. Very close. Manannán reached for her hand across the space between them, and this time she let him hold it fully, without pulling away, without softening the truth of what she had just admitted aloud. "Thank you," he said simply, "for telling me. Not forgiveness, because there was nothing here that needed forgiving. Only gratitude, plain and whole, for a door finally opened after so long closed." Mongán, watching his parents in that fire-lit quiet, understood that his own fostering debt and his mother's old grief were somehow part of the very same unfinished thread running through this whole household. That thread we will follow closely in the part of the story that comes next, the turning point, when an old grief and a mortal hero's return finally arrive at this household's door together. For tonight, though, let the fire burn low and easy. The household has weathered its first true test, and whatever comes next, it will come to a family that has learned, finally, to face things together. Sleep found Mongán first that night, still curled near the hearth as he had as a boy, though he was nearly grown now. Some habits, comforting ones, are worth keeping regardless of age. Fand and Manannán sat a while longer, watching the fire settle to embers, neither quite ready yet to close the night, though both were, at last, at some kind of peace with what had been said. Outside, the mist border held quiet and steady through the rest of that night, undisturbed, as though whatever had tested it earlier had for now withdrawn to gather its own strength elsewhere. Morning came softly over the island, mist lifting slowly from the hills the way it always did, indifferent, in its own patient way, to whatever the household beneath it had faced the night before. Manannán rose early, as he often did after a night of trouble, and walked the shoreline alone before the others woke, checking the mist border with his own hands the way a farmer checks a fence line. He found nothing unusual, though he lingered longer than the inspection strictly required, some old caution still humming quietly beneath his calm. The sea rarely gave second warnings for free. Lugaid's small curragh appeared on the horizon not long after, earlier than his usual visits. Manannán watched it approach with a familiar, weary patience. Good news rarely traveled at this particular hour. Lugaid arrived breathless again, though this time his news was different, not warning of danger, but of a mortal hero seen crossing toward the mist border itself, alone, asking for passage by name. "He asked for you by name," Lugaid said carefully, watching Manannán's face for reaction. "But it was not your name he spoke first, it was hers." Manannán went very still. "We are close now to the name Fand has not yet spoken aloud in this telling. Close, but not there quite yet. Let this rest a moment longer before the story carries us fully across that threshold." Manannán thanked Lugaid as always and sent him home with quiet instructions to say nothing further of what he had seen. Some news needs to arrive inside a household before it travels anywhere else. He walked back to the hall slowly, turning over how exactly to tell Fand what Lugaid had seen, not out of fear of her reaction, but out of care for how carefully this truth deserved to be handled. Fand was in the garden behind the hall when he found her, hands full of pale sea lavender, humming softly to herself, entirely unaware of what waited just beyond the mist border that morning. Manannán stood a moment simply watching her before speaking, memorizing this particular ordinary piece, sensing correctly that whatever came next might change its shape, even if it did not break it entirely. "Lugaid brought news this morning," he began carefully. Fand looked up at once, something in his voice already telling her more than his words had managed to yet. She set the lavender down slowly. "Someone has come to the mortal edge of the border," Manannán told her gently, "asking for you, specifically, by a name I believe you have not spoken aloud in this house until last night." Fand did not need to ask who. Her face told Manannán everything before she spoke a single word. Recognition, fear, and something older and more complicated than either, all arriving together at once. "Cuchulainn," she said finally, and the name settled into the garden air like something long held underwater finally allowed to surface. Manannán did not flinch at hearing it. He had, in truth, expected it for some time. "We have reached the name now, at last, that this whole telling has been circling since the shore of the three waves first rose. What comes next will ask more of this household than anything before it." Manannán took her hand, steady as the tide, and asked her plainly what she wished to do. Not what duty demanded, not what the household required, only what she herself wanted in this moment. Fand was quiet a long while before answering, the whole weight of an old, unfinished love and a new, chosen one balanced carefully behind her eyes. "I want to see him," she said, "just once to finish it properly." Manannán nodded, and did not once ask her to reconsider this. He understood by now, was exactly the kind of choosing he had promised her long ago never to stand in the way of. They would go together to the mist border the following dawn, Fand to face what she had never let herself finish, and Manannán beside her, ready for whatever waited on the mortal side of that old threshold. This is the first true climax of this old story, not a battle won, but a threshold finally, deliberately approached after so long spent circling it in silence. What waits beyond it? We will follow closely from here. Mongán told everything that evening, asked only if he should come with them. Manannán shook his head gently. "This crossing belongs to your mother," he said. "Some thresholds are meant to be walked by only two." That night, none of them slept easily, though none of them said so aloud. The fire was kept burning later than usual, as if its light alone might hold the coming dawn back a little longer. Fand sat alone by the still pool for a while before dawn, one hand resting lightly on the water's surface, saying nothing, simply letting herself feel the whole shape of what tomorrow would finally ask of her. When dawn finally came, pale and quiet over the island, Manannán was already waiting at the shore, cloak settled calm around his shoulders, ready to walk beside her into whatever this threshold held. Fand joined him a moment later, steady now, the fear from the night before folded quietly away beneath her resolve. Together, hand in hand, they turned to face the mist border and began to walk.